Prime Minister Narendra Modi actually, virtually spent a day on INS Vikrant. This is perhaps the first time that the Prime Minister has spent a night on an Indian Navy ship. You just have a clearance of 1 meter. If you go above that, you will miss the hook. If you go below that, you will crash into the ship. The Indian Navy was all set to go, and its ships had reached a position where they would be launching weapons before Pakistan begged for a ceasefire. India was exporting nearly 1900 crores worth of defense equipment to other countries. Today, that figure touches 24,000 crores. We are still stuck in the concept of Naam Namak Nishan. Unfortunately, even the Indian armed forces do not understand that this is actually a colonial term.
Hello and a very warm welcome to all. You're watching Hindustan Times and my name is Aisha Varma. This Diwali, a very special message was sent out by none other than the Prime Minister. To decode what it meant and to discuss key particulars, we have the executive editor of Hindustan Times joining us, Mr. Shishir Gupta. Sir, namaskar. Sir, during the Prime Minister's speech, he spoke about a self-reliant India. He lauded our forces, of course, in the wake of Operation Sindoor. Beyond this, he also put the spotlight on INS Vikrant. Tell us more about what his message was and the significance of it.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi actually spent a day on INS Vikrant, which is India's latest aircraft carrier. He was there for nearly 17 hours on board the ship. And I'm told that he had a very good time understanding how the Indian Navy functions. This is perhaps the first time that the Prime Minister has spent a night on an Indian Navy ship. Now, what makes INS Vikrant important and significant as part of the Indian force capability is the very fact of naval aviation. You see, Prime Minister saw the MiG-29Ks land and take off somewhere late evening, about 5 to 7, 6, and then he saw the night fighter operations also. And the entire thing, I think, closed down around 8:39. Now, what makes it very important is that landing a fighter at the speed of nearly 250 kilometers on a deck which is just 262 meters, it's a humongous task. You just have a clearance of 1 meter. If you go above that, you will miss the hook. If you go below that, you'll crash into the ship. Night fighter operations is something which the Indian Navy and India should be very proud of. Very few countries in the world have the capability to do naval aviation. And of course, America leads in that, but very few people. India has been operating an aircraft carrier way back from 1960. And it is one technical expertise that is so hard to gain. Many countries have tried it. They have not been able to succeed. So this is really the crowning glory of the Indian Navy. You can gauge how much Prime Minister liked his trip on INS Vikrant, that he was supposed to offer sweets to only 9 people, but he ended up giving sweets to 150 people. Prime Minister was seen to be clapping the night fighter operations on his own, and he was more than happy to see how the Indian Navy was functioning and to be with the Indian Navy personnel. Now, there are two aspects to it. One is that if you look at the positioning of our country, nearly 66% of global oil trade passes through India's 9-degree channel, which is next to Lakshadweep, then goes on the 10-degree channel, which bifurcates Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and then proceeds towards Malacca Straits, Sunda or Lombok Straits to go into South China Sea and beyond. So India is positioned in such a way that the Indian Navy can not only help the global trade in terms of maritime security, but also use it as a leverage in case of a worst case scenario. That is why the Indian Navy is so important in the Indian Ocean region. Not only this, India can provide and has provided human disaster relief assistance to a whole lot of countries in the past decade. And that was because the Indian Navy has the prowess to do it. Now, what happened that day was that a number of ships which had participated in Operation Sindoor were also part of this team past. While Navy did not launch any weapon towards Pakistan during Operation Sindoor, let me tell you, the Indian Navy was all set to go, and its ships had reached a position where they would be launching weapons before Pakistan begged for a ceasefire. On May 10th at 9:30 a.m., the Pakistan DGMO called up the Indian DGMO to say that we have heard that the Indian Navy is launching BrahMos cruise missile towards Karachi and there would be ramifications. When this message was conveyed right at the top, the answer was go ahead, fully realizing that Pakistan would be launching its own missiles towards Jamnagar, towards Bhuj in Gujarat. So it was that close that the Indian Navy came during Operation Sindoor. And it is for that very reason that the Prime Minister, understanding the force multiplier effect of the Indian Navy against an adversary as well as in the Indian Ocean region, he decided to honor the Indian Navy by going on its flagship INS Vikrant.
So when we also talk about something as special as INS Vikrant, we also talk about the idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Why is it so crucial, especially when we look at the progress of India as a nation?
See, Atmanirbhar Bharat is a concept. It's a much bigger concept that's just simply asking the Indian public sector and private sector to make weapons or to have a military industrialization complex in India. It was an overarching concept. Now, what has happened is that when Prime Minister Narendra Modi took over the reins of power in 2014, India was exporting nearly 1900 crores worth of defense equipment to other countries. Today, that figure touches 24,000 crores. That is the difference that Atmanirbhar Bharat has made. But that apart, Atmanirbhar Bharat is also trying to revitalize the Indian private sector and pushing the Indian public sector, which is often in a lethargic mode, to making better military platforms, better hardware with high technology items. That is what Atmanirbhar Bharat is. Now, for Atmanirbhar Bharat to succeed, let me also tell you something that Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-indigenization has been talked about since the 1962 war, right? So initially it was the concept of Swadeshi, then the concept became self-indigenization, now Atmanirbhar Bharat. But hardly anything has happened really, so to speak, till such time you come into when Prime Minister Narendra Modi takes over the reins of power. So now what has happened is that, you're focusing into areas where that expertise you need to develop so that you do not have to rely on a third country in the worst case scenario. Now, given the global situation as such, the Gaza war is still not over, as so to speak. The Ukraine war is on. Afghanistan, Pakistan is there. There have been other places where there is friction all over the world. Now, if in case, if you have radical leaders like Asim Munir in Pakistan, anything happens, India will be forced to react. And if India needs to react, India needs to have the stand-off weapons to ensure that it can inflict maximum damage on any adversary which threatens to challenge India. For that, you need specific weapons, specific platforms. For instance, India needs to make an aircraft engine. India needs to make ship engines. India needs to have missile engines. So the core technologies is something that India should be looking at. Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about, sort of making everything on your own. Atmanirbhar Bharat is making the core stuff that is required so that you can build on, and when the worst case scenario comes, you are prepared. And that is why this concept has to succeed if India is to become a global power in the near future.
So then, sir, bouncing off of what you just said, does this mean then that this concept is part of a larger national security setup?
Yes, it's a concept with a larger security setup. First is, there is this military industrialization complex, but then it is also something where you are trying to decolonize or bring in reforms in the Indian armed forces. Now, Prime Minister talked about the decolonization during his speech of at the Independence Day when India observed the 75th Independence Day. Now, what is happening is that the Indian armed forces also need reform, and it also needs decolonization. Now, if you look at the Indian Army and if you talk to people, if you talk to the Indian Armed Forces people, they use a whole lot of phrases which have been derived from Western think tanks, right? Kinetic weapons, Chatham House rules. They will use all sorts of think tank vocabulary which has come into their system, and they think that this is the best way possible, rather than developing their own phraseology which would define the Indian theatre in case we go to war. Similarly, we are still stuck in the concept of Naam Namak Nishan. Unfortunately, even the Indian armed forces do not understand that this is actually a colonial term. When the 1857 mutiny took place, the British decided that they would make regiments based on martial castes. So, Naam was essentially defining the caste or the region, right? Namak, the commanding officer of the battalion, used to give you your salary. So, he would give you Namak. Nishan was the Nishan of the regimental flag. So, nowhere in this India came into it. Nowhere in this the Indian concept was there. Nowhere in this Bharat was there. This was done to divide the nation. And before that, you had, like there used to be 36 Bengal infantry. But there were numbers. Then you gave into martial regiments. Now, while the concept is still there, maybe a reform, maybe decolonization is required on that. Then you have to have your own independent tactics. You cannot rely on how Europe conducts war, or how America conducts war, or how whosoever conducts war. It has to be region specific, it has to be theatre specific, it has to be doctrine specific. Then what you need is theatre commands. Now, theatre command, you may say it's an American concept, or you may say it's a concept which is originated in the West. In India, we are not doing theatre commands the way Americans do. We are doing theatre commands where each theatre is focused on one adversary. So in case we had to have a Western theatre command, it will be focused on Pakistan. In case we had to have an Eastern theatre command, it's going to be focused on China. Then the Maritime theatre. And then one theatre separately, that is the Northern theatre, where both China and Pakistan are on either side. So that has a different dimension. So all this is also part of decolonization. All this is also part of Atmanirbharta. All this is also part where you start thinking independently rather than follow the thought leaders or follow the think tanks in the West. This is what Atmanirbhar Bharat is.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us and providing us with all of that crucial insight. With that, it's a wrap. But do stay tuned for next week's part 2 on this discussion.